ongoing MONUSCO support to FRDC, M23, and Rwandan forces penetrated Munigi, Carter in the outskirts of Goma city, causing mass panic and flight among the population. Roads are blocked and the airport can no longer be used for evacuation or humanitarian efforts. M23 has declared the airspace over Goma closed. In other words, we are trapped. I call on this council to act now to secure the civilian population, humanitarian aid workers, and all United Nations personnel. Mr. President, when I presented the last report of the Secretary General on the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo on 9 December, the 23rd March movement, M23, with the active support of the Rwandan armed forces, had consolidated its occupation in North Kivu province, doubling its controlled territory compared to 2012. Today, M23 has expanded its control in North Kivu and extended its advance into South Kivu province, from which MONUSCO withdrew in June 2024. It has received reinforcement and supplies to strengthen its position along several axes, both south and north of Goma. It notably deployed a heavy presence near Sake, 25 kilometers west of Goma, and is advancing in Munigi, 9 kilometers north of Goma. In line with its protection of civilians mandate, MONUSCO has enhanced its support to the armed forces of the Democratic Republic of Congo, FRDC, by sharing information, participating in joint tactical planning, and actively participating in combat, along with SADC mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, SAMI-DRC. MONUSCO has notably activated Operation Springbok 3 and deployed one quick reaction force, one rapid deployment battalion, a reserve battalion, a platoon size of special forces, and an artillery battery to reinforce its position to counter M23's advance. In a context of permanent movement of population fleeing for their lives or used as human shields, the military response, especially the use of MONUSCO artillery, is being carefully calibrated to avoid harming civilians and our forces on the ground or damaging civilian facilities. The United Nations also temporarily relocate non-essential personnel from Goma. These efforts are still underway. This measure aims to guarantee the safety of personnel while maintaining essential United Nations operations in the province. This relocation in no way affects the unwavering commitment of the United Nations to provide humanitarian aid and protect civilians in North Kivu. GPS jamming and spoofing incidents have resumed more intensely than ever before. These attacks hamper the protection of civilians and the safety and security of United Nations personnel. The mission stands ready to provide documentation in support of the Democratic Republic of Congo's complaint to the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, and encourage member states to do the same. While MONUSCO's robust posture in support of FRDC and SAMI-DRC has helped counter mis- and disinformation, the Congolese authorities and MONUSCO continue to coordinate joint communication, and ensure clear, unified messaging. Nevertheless, I must draw the Council's attention to a troubling rise in targeted hate speech led by M23-affiliated online campaigns. Their hateful rhetoric targets me as special representative of the Secretary General, but also the mission spokesperson who has received threats of sexual violence. I call on the Congolese authorities to clearly condemn hate speech that targets especially human rights defenders and civil society actors. So far, at least 32 human rights defenders have approached MONUSCO for protection measures. In response, the mission implements individual protection mechanisms with human rights networks. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, more than ever, we must find a political solution. A displaced person from North Kivu recently insisted that even the Second World War ended thanks to dialogue. So I would like to call on the DRC and Rwanda to continue political negotiations in the context of the Luanda process. In this regard, hostile rhetoric and mutual accusations must end to make way for discussions and constructive steps. I welcome the efforts of the international community to preserve this process, above all after the aborted summit of the 15th of December 2024. Specifically, I also call on Rwanda to withdraw its forces from the Congolese territory, to end its support for the M23, and to, as soon as possible, deploy its delegates to the ad hoc strengthened verification mechanism to join the members from Angola and the DRC. I also call on the DRC to make significant efforts to neutralize the FDLR. I reaffirm MONUSCO's commitment to supporting these efforts under the context of its mandate. In parallel, I encourage close synergies between the Luanda process and the Nairobi process, which is currently being revitalized. This to promote notable progress, we must make concessions, particularly the M23 must immediately withdraw towards the pre-4th of August positions. I call on all parties to respect their obligations to protect civilians in full respect for international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Civilian infrastructure providing essential services to civilians must also never be targeted. President, as Angola is preparing to preside over the African Union in February, I support a second SADC quadripartite summit involving SADC, the International Conference of the Great Lakes Economic Community of Central African States, ECAS, and the East African Community, the EAC, to strengthen these peace efforts. It's also crucial to urgently convene a fresh tripartite summit between the UNHCR, the DRC, and Rwanda. Furthermore, it's essential to ensure that the 12th summit of the regional follow-up mechanism of the African Union Peace and Security Council is held, to relaunch the Framework Agreement for Peace, Security and Cooperation. I encourage the Angolan presidency of the African Union to promote the inclusion of women in peace initiatives. In the DRC, this could involve the implementation of a national strategy for positive masculinity, as well as the establishment of an interministerial committee and national council on gender and parity, provided for both in the law of 2015 on parity. President, MONUSCO is supporting efforts to hold all of those responsible for human rights violations accountable. It is, in addition, important to identify victims to ensure that justice can be done to them, while also curbing the risk that violence, including gender-based violence, is repeated. In addition, international warrants must be issued against those that are fueling insecurity and committing human rights and IHL violations, particularly with the Special Envoy for the region of the Great Lakes region, Ambassador Huang Zia. I call on the Council to take decisive steps, including targeted sanctions against the perpetrators of violations. No exception must be made. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Keita for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Joyce Msuya.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you for this opportunity to brief the Council on the humanitarian situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Mr. President, the crisis in Eastern DRC is at a dangerous point. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, and if hostilities spill into Goma, a densely populated urban center, the impact on civilians could be devastating. More than 21 million people already need aid across the country, one of the highest numbers worldwide. Approximately 1 million people had already sought refuge in neighboring countries. The escalation in the east threatens to make a critical humanitarian situation even worse. In North and South Kivu, hundreds of civilians have been killed and injured in the last few weeks. Hundreds of thousands have fled their homes or shelters, often multiple times, to escape gunfire and shelling, especially around Sake and Minova. Humanitarian access remains constrained due to insecurity. Hospitals, including Dosho and Kieshero in Goma, are overwhelmed. Medical facilities in Minova are also struggling to tend to the hundreds of people in need of treatment for gunshot and shrapnel wounds. Bombings in overcrowded displacement sites in and around Sake and Minova have resulted in casualties, including among children, and destroyed shelters, causing panic and further displacement. I'm particularly concerned about the impact on women and girls. We already know that gender-based violence increased by 300% in recent years, and that 2/3 of all cases had occurred in 3 eastern provinces of North Kivu, South Kivu, and Ituri. Mr. President, the Secretary General has emphasized the importance of upholding international humanitarian and human rights law and ensuring immediate and unimpeded humanitarian access to populations in need. I reiterate this call. We urge all parties to protect civilians and critical infrastructure they rely on, respect the civilian nature of displacement sites, and avoid using wide area explosives and heavy weapons in populated areas. This will be particularly important should the hostilities spread into Goma, given the risks of conflict in urban areas. All parties must take constant care to spare civilians and civilian objects throughout military operations. Mr. President, in these challenging circumstances, our humanitarian partners have bravely and tirelessly continued their efforts to enable life-saving operations by negotiating access, including by providing critical care through our partners, particularly NGOs that deliver medical and food assistance. Council members To address this escalating humanitarian crisis before the situation worsens further, I have 3 asks to the Council. First, I urge this Council and all Member States to leverage their influence to ensure that international humanitarian law is respected by all parties. Civilians must be protected. IDP sites and medical facilities must be protected. Rapid, unimpeded, and safe humanitarian access to those in need must be facilitated. Second, since we are at the start of the year and many funding sources remain unavailable or delayed for various reasons, adequate funding is essential to enable and sustain urgent humanitarian action. In light of the scale and severity of the current situation, we are allocating $17 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund for immediate life-saving interventions. However, let's be clear, additional resources are urgently needed. Third, I urge the Council and all Member States to use their influence to end the hostilities. The scale of suffering in the DRC demands urgent attention. The plight of the country's women, men, and children cannot continue to go unnoticed. Thank you.
I thank Mrs. Suya for her briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make a statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, I'd like to begin by thanking the US Chief for Peace Operations, the Special Representative of the Secretary General, and the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs. I welcome here the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Security Council is meeting today due to the rapid deterioration of the situation in North Kivu in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the capture of Sake and the encircling of Goma by the M23, enabled by the active support of the Rwandan Defense Forces. The situation is serious, and this Council must take stock of it. France reaffirms its solidarity towards the Democratic Republic of the Congo and its unwavering commitment to its territorial integrity and sovereignty. We express our deep concern with regard to the dangerous escalation of the conflict in North Kivu around Goma, and we firmly condemn the ongoing offensive caused by the M23 actively supported by Rwanda. The presence in the DRC of foreign military forces against the will of the Congolese authorities is a clear violation of the United Nations Charter. This offensive, as well as the support to arms groups by all parties, causes a major risk to the protection of the civilian population and is contributing to the displacement of tens of thousands of civilians. The M23
son offensive
cease its offensive and withdraw from the territory that it has taken control of. France urgently calls for a return of the ceasefire and a resumption of dialogue. There is no military outcome for this conflict. The President of the Republic, Emmanuel Macron, recalled this yesterday to President Kagame and Tshisekedi, with whom he held meetings. The dialogue undertaken with regard to under the Nairobi and Luanda processes with the full support of France must resume without delay. A political process must also resume. France stands ready to support it. Force is not an option here. In this context, France calls for a withdrawal of forces from the DRC territory and the dismantlement of the these forces under the commitments made by Rwanda under the Luanda process. Finally, France expresses its full support to MONUSCO, which is playing a crucial role for the protection of civilians, whose mandate has been unanimously renewed on the 20th of December last year. We roundly condemn the attacks undertaken by the M23 against MONUSCO, which has already led to the death of several blue helmets over the last few days. We recall that attacks against blue helmets may represent war crimes. We pay tribute to the bravery of MONUSCO troops, and we pay our condolences to the families of the victims, to South Africa, to Uruguay, and to Malawi. France also condemns all measures that are hampering MONUSCO's ability to fully undertake its mandate, particularly the deployment of soil-to-air missile systems
par le M23.
in the M23 controlled areas with the direct support of the Rwandan armed forces. President, the reactions of the international community must be commensurate with the humanitarian and political consequences caused by the ongoing offensive by the M23, supported by the Rwandan armed forces. France calls on all of the Security Council to mobilize and to unanimously condemn this serious threat to peace, regional peace and security, and international peace and security, as the United Nations Secretary General once again has done this morning in very clear terms. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the A3+ members, Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my country, Sierra Leone. We are deeply grateful to USG Jean-Pierre Lacroix, SRSG Ms. Bintou Keita, and ASG Joyce Musoya for their thorough and detailed account of the alarming situation in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. We also warmly welcome the participation of Her Excellency Therese Kaikwamba Wagner, Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the representatives of Rwanda, Angola, Uruguay, South Africa, and Burundi at this important emergency meeting. At the outset, we extend our heartfelt condolences to the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the family of General Peter Chiriwami, Governor of North Kivu. Our thoughts are also with the families of the fallen U.S. peacekeepers and the SAMI DRC contingent. We wish a speedy and full recovery to all those injured. We express our unwavering solidarity with the United Nations and humanitarian actors on the ground who continue their essential work under incredibly difficult and dangerous conditions. Mr. President, in recent days, the A3+ has been actively engaging with a broad range of stakeholders to assess how the UN Security Council can best assist the Congolese people in bringing an end to the violence in Eastern DRC following the breach of the ceasefire by the M23 AFC. Our consultations with the government of the DRC and Rwanda, alongside discussions with the UN Secretariat, has reinforced a singular, undeniable conclusion. The resolution of the conflict in Eastern DRC must be political, not military. In this context, we affirm that the Luanda and Nairobi processes remain viable paths to peace. Let us be clear. While we advocate for a political solution, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Democratic Republic of Congo must be respected by all state and non-state actors alike. In light of the recent development in the DRC, the A3+ would like to underscore the following key points. First, we unequivocally condemn the killing of MONUSCO peacekeepers and SAMI DRC military personnel during the current offensive by the M23 AFC rebel group. We commend MONUSCO for maintaining its defensive posture in protecting civilians and fulfilling its mandate. We call for continued coordination between MONUSCO, RDC, and SAMI DRC in line with their mandates and relevant Security Council resolutions. We also strongly condemn the spoofing and jamming of GPS signals used by MONUSCO and demand that the M23/AFC cease such disruptive activities. While the international community rightfully focuses on evacuating its citizens, diplomats, and staff, we must not forget the safety and security of the Congolese people who have nowhere to seek refuge. The protection of millions of Congolese civilians remains a top priority for the A3+, and we urge MONUSCO to continue its vital role in safeguarding both the population and critical infrastructure in Goma. Second, we call on the M23 AFC rebels to immediately cease hostilities, halt their offensive, and return to their designated pre-cantonment areas. The M23 AFC must engage through the Nairobi process and silence their guns. As we have stated, the ultimate resolution to the conflict in Eastern DRC lies in political dialogue. In light of recent development, the A3+ calls on all parties to engage meaningfully and in good faith in order to create the conditions for peace. In this context, we call on the government of the DRC to engage in good faith with all relevant stakeholders and commit to the neutralization of the FDLR as outlined in the harmonized plan within the framework of the Rwanda process. We call on the government of DRC and the government of Rwanda to return without preconditions to the diplomatic talks under the Rwanda process to achieve a lasting and peaceful resolution of the conflict in the region, including by addressing respective issues pertaining to the neutralization of the FDLR and disengagement of the forces outside the territory of the DRC. Third, we strongly urge those who continue to support the M23's advancement to immediately cease such assistance, as it undermines the long-term peace and stability of both the DRC and the border region. We are deeply concerned about the January 25th communique from the M23 AFC, which can only exacerbate tensions and undermine prospects for peace. The government of the DRC must receive our collective support as a council in its effort to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity and to ensure the protection of its people. Further, we urge this council to work strenuously to promote meaningful engagement, to de-escalate tensions, and to avoid attributing blame to the parties to the conflict. We further urge proactive support for the Rwanda and Nairobi processes. This includes ensuring that no external actors, intentionally or unintentionally, contribute to the perpetration of the conflict between Rwanda and the DRC, including through the provision of weaponry and other resources. Fourth, we emphasize the urgent need to resume the Nairobi process. We call on the DRC government to be fully committed to the process, and we encourage continued African leadership for engaging all relevant stakeholders and revitalizing the process with the full backing of the international community. Mr. President, as we call for an end to the M23 AFC offensive, the international community must take immediate action to support MONUSCO in alleviating the severe humanitarian crisis in Eastern DRC. According to OCHA, there are currently 6.5 million displaced persons in the country, with over 34,000 newly displaced individuals seeking refuge around Goma. Emergency hospitals in Goma are overwhelmed, with more than 290 individuals wounded, including 90 civilians, many of whom have life-threatening injuries. We must rally behind MONUSCO and other UN agencies to provide vital medical assistance. We are deeply concerned that 80% of Goma's electricity and water supply has been damaged due to the M23 AFC offensive. Furthermore, 400,000 children are currently out of school as a result of the closure of educational institutions in the region. In closing, Mr. President, we wish to express our gratitude to His Excellency President João Lourenço of Angola and former President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya for their unwavering commitment to peace in Eastern DRC and their important contributions under the Rwanda and Nairobi processes, respectively. We also echo the call of His Excellency Mustafaki, chairpersons of the African Union Commission, urging all parties to engage in the ongoing peace efforts under the auspices of the Rwanda and Nairobi processes. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to today's briefers, and in particular to SRSG Keita for your steadfast leadership of MONUSCO amid a clear and deliberate escalation of the conflict in eastern DRC. Thank you also to ASG Masuya, and I welcome the participation of the DRC Minister of Foreign Affairs in this meeting. Colleagues, we condemn in the strongest terms Rwanda's and M23's hostilities on Goma and attacks on Sake. We urgently call for a ceasefire and an end to this fighting, which has endangered civilians and further displaced tens of thousands more as hundreds of thousands flee the fighting. The United States commends the MONUSCO leadership for taking such robust steps to defend Sake and Goma from Rwanda and M23's advances. We express our deepest condolences to the families of all of the peacekeepers lost during these attacks, and we commend all MONUSCO personnel for their bravery in protecting civilians during this ongoing assault. Rwanda's use of advanced weaponry and systems, including GPS jamming and spoofing, have interfered with the humanitarian response, endangered MONUSCO, and continue to endanger those fleeing from the violence. These actions must stop immediately. The indiscriminate use of artillery has endangered civilians, with bombs falling on and near IDP sites. Congolese and Rwandan leadership, as well as leaders of the M23 and other armed groups, must issue clear orders not to target civilians and to respect the civilian character of IDP sites. Colleagues, there is no military solution to the conflict in eastern DRC. To achieve a durable peace, all parties must honor their commitments to the Luanda process and the terms laid out by Angolan President Lorenzo and return to the negotiating table. We call for the swift operationalization of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism. We also support the efforts of former President Kenyatta to mediate with M23. All sides of this conflict must respect the ceasefire in place since August and act swiftly to end this fighting. We call on all partners in the Great Lakes region to use the diplomatic tools at their disposal to reinforce this message. All actors must also respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC and put an end to all forms of support to armed groups, whether Congolese or foreign. All parties must uphold human rights and international humanitarian law and ensure immediate and unfettered access to populations in need of humanitarian assistance. The United States remains alarmed by the findings of the recent report of the UN Group of Experts detailing the consolidation of parallel administrations, forced recruitments, and the illicit exploitation of mining areas in M23-controlled territories. And we reiterate in unequivocal terms our condemnation of hate speech and xenophobia, as well as ethnic-based politics. The United States will consider all the tools at its disposal in order to hold accountable those responsible for sustaining armed conflict, instability, and insecurity in the DRC. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank USG Lacroix, SRSG Ms. Keita and ASG Ms. Musuya for briefing us on this urgent meeting today. I would also like to welcome the participation of the Honourable Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo in our meeting. Greece commends SRSG Keita and MONUSCO for the continued efforts in these extremely difficult circumstances amidst the escalating crisis in the region. We follow developments closely also through our embassy in Kinshasa, since we have also Greek citizens residing in Goma. Allow me to emphasize 4 key points. First, we strongly condemn the recent flagrant violation of the ceasefire and the subsequent M23's further advance in North Kivu. M23 must reverse the territorial expansion immediately and hold the encirclement of the town of Goma. Threats by M23 of seizing Goma are completely unacceptable. Moreover, as the Secretary General stressed also in his today's statements, the presence of Rwandan troops on Congolese soil and the support to the M23 are very concerning. We call on Rwanda to cease its support for the M23 and to withdraw its forces now, and we reiterate that the sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity of the DRC must be fully respected. Second, in the next stage, peace cannot be attained without the withdrawal of Rwandan forces and the neutralization of the FDLR by the DRC. It is more imperative than ever that both DRC and particularly Rwanda commit to the ceasefire, re-engage sincerely in the political dialogue, and implement all decisions and commitments agreed under the Luanda process. We commend Angola's President Lorenzo for his continued efforts for peace, and we believe that he deserved the Council's support. As a point of principle, my country, Greece, believes that and supports that African-led solutions are needed to address African issues. Third, the Council ought to focus on humanitarian conditions, especially in North Kivu, that remain very dire. All parties must respect international humanitarian law and ensure unrestricted humanitarian access. Fourth, we express our deepest condolences to the families of the peacekeepers killed and to the troop contributing countries, South Africa, Malawi, and Uruguay. We hope for a speedy recovery of the peacekeepers injured. We emphasize that attacks against peacekeepers may constitute potential war crimes and that attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers form also a basis for sanctions designations. Finally, MONUSCO must be granted full access and freedom of movement to effectively fulfill its mandate and address urgent needs. The protection of civilians and humanitarian personnel must remain an absolute priority. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, President. I thank USG Lacroix, Special Representative Keita, and ASGM Suya for the updates on the alarming situation in the Eastern DRC. No words could truly capture the depth and gravity of the situation that we are witnessing in North Kivu as we speak. We must not and we cannot remain indifferent or silent to what is happening. Mr. President, Slovenia is deeply alarmed by the recent rapid escalation of violence in the Eastern DRC. The seizure of vast territories, the displacement of hundreds of thousands of civilians, and the blatant violation of international law are direct assault on regional peace and stability. They undermine the Luanda and Nairobi processes and constitute breach of the ceasefire agreements. The capture of Minova and Sake alongside the looming threat of Goma raises deep alarm and carries catastrophic security and humanitarian consequences. We categorically condemn the actions of the M23 and demand the immediate cessation of all hostilities. We call on them to immediately stop attacks on Goma and halt any plans to seize any part of entire city. We call for the full and unconditional withdrawal of the forces from the territories that they have seized. We reiterate our strong call on Rwanda to immediately cease its support to M23 and fully withdraw its forces from the DRC territory. Any unauthorized military presence in the DRC is a flagrant violation of international law, the UN Charter, and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. At the same time, we urge the DRC to cease all cooperation with the FDLR and other armed groups, honoring their commitments under international law and regional arrangements. We urge Rwanda and the DRC to take decisive actions to de-escalate tensions in their relations, to re-engage in dialogue, and place the highest priority on peace, stability, and the well-being of the region. The consequences of displacement are severe. Concerns over heightened vulnerability of women and children facing the abhorrent risk of sexual and gender-based violence are high. We strongly warn against deepening ethnic divisions, including hate speech. We remind all parties of their obligations and call on them to uphold international humanitarian and human rights law ensuring protection of civilians, and refraining from any actions, including the use of heavy firepower, which has devastating effects on densely populated areas, including displacement camps. Mr. President, we unequivocally condemn the attacks and threats against MONUSCO and their personnel, as well as semi-DRC, in the strongest possible terms. We mourn the tragic loss of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice and extend our condolences to their families. We stand in solidarity with the wounded, wishing them a swift recovery. These acts are not just an affront to those who serve in MONUSCO and may amount to war crimes, but they are also an assault to the very values of the international community and an attack on peace itself. They call for justice and accountability. We extend our gratitude to all troops and police contributing countries for their sacrifice and contribution to the UN efforts in the DRC. We stand with them in these difficult times. Mr. President, a little over a month ago, all 15 members of this Council raised their hands in unison to renew MONUSCO's mandate. That vote was not only symbolic. It was a commitment to the women and men peacekeepers in uniform and beyond, whose foremost duty is the protection of civilians in Eastern DRC and supporting peace efforts in the Eastern DRC. They have put their own lives at risk on a daily basis. Today, these very women and men, alongside millions of innocent civilians, face mortal threats. We mourn the tragic loss of those who have made the ultimate sacrifice, and we stand with others in solidarity. Colleagues, the international community and this Council cannot afford to remain passive in the face of the crisis. We have clearly heard calls from the field to the Council to send a clear message. It is our responsibility to stand unequivocally behind them. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me start by thanking all the briefers today, and in particular, to extend my thanks to SOSG Keita for her steadfast leadership. I welcome the participation of DRC Foreign Minister Wagner at our meeting, as well as the representatives of Rwanda, Angola, Uruguay, and South Africa. President, MONUSCO peacekeepers and personnel work bravely to deliver this Council's mandate in the most difficult of circumstances. The United Kingdom reiterates clearly today that attacks on UN peacekeepers are absolutely unacceptable and may constitute war crimes. We also recall that planning, directing, sponsoring, or conducting attacks against MONUSCO peacekeepers may constitute a basis for UN sanctions designations. The UK extends its sympathies to the families of the Blue Helmets from South Africa and Uruguay who've lost their lives serving in MONUSCO. And we extend our best wishes for a full recovery to those peacekeepers who've been injured. The UK also extends its condolences to the families of all troops from the Southern African Development Community mission in DRC who've lost their lives in support of DRC's stability and security. As we do so, we fully acknowledge the numbers of those lost and injured is changing by the hour. It is a critical moment for DRC and for the region. President, I would now like to make 3 points. First, the UK once again condemns the violent actions of all armed groups, including FDLR and M23. We are deeply concerned by the scale and pace of recent M23 and Rwandan Defence Forces advances in eastern DRC. In December, this Council renewed MONUSCO's mandate. And in the 4 weeks since, M23's unacceptable offensive and that of the Rwandan Defence Forces through North and South Kivu has resulted in the capture of several towns and villages. As we've heard, hundreds of thousands of civilians have been displaced, and violence has intensified as a result. We are also deeply alarmed by M23's declaration that they intend to take Goma, a city where the humanitarian situation is already catastrophic. The rising number of displaced people resulting from M23's territorial expansion has placed further pressure on crowded IDP camps and exacerbates the challenges faced by humanitarian actors. This morning, the UK Foreign Secretary spoke with President Kagame and called for urgent de-escalation, outlining the need for Rwanda and DRC to urgently return to the negotiating table. Now more than ever, it is critical that MONUSCO is able to deliver its mandate. M23 attacks on peacekeepers, with support from the RDF, must stop immediately. These attacks prevent the force from being able to discharge its Security Council mandated mission to protect civilians. Rwandan spoofing and jamming of GPS signals, which obstruct UN and humanitarian operations, must also stop. We urge all parties to remember their obligations under international humanitarian law. Finally, President, the United Kingdom once again extends its thanks to Angola for its leadership on mediation efforts. We encourage DRC and Rwanda to return to the negotiating table and to focus on making tangible progress on delivering on their commitments under the concept of operations. There can be no military solution. Fighting must stop, civilians must be protected, and the parties should engage in good faith in the political process. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. SRG Keita, thank you for your briefing today. MONUSCO is facing immense pressure. Denmark greatly appreciates your continued leadership and engagement. Let me also thank ASG Msuya, and through her, the entire humanitarian community in the DRC, and USG Lacroix and the Department of Peace Operations for their tireless work in support of our peacekeepers. And I welcome the presence of Her Excellency Foreign Minister Wagner in today's meeting. Let me first express Denmark's deepest condolences to the families, friends, and comrades of the brave peacekeepers who have paid the ultimate sacrifice in the service of peace. Mr. President, as we speak, the M23, with the support of Rwandan defense forces, are advancing towards Goma. Denmark condemns, in the strongest terms, the M23's offensive in Goma and its recent captures of Minova and Sake. The human suffering this has caused and will cause is unconscionable. Let there be no doubt. This offensive, as well as Rwanda's military presence in the DRC, are clear violations of the terms agreed in the ceasefire, clear violations of the UN Charter, and clear violations of the territorial integrity of the DRC. We call on the M23 and RDF to cease the operations and withdraw from all occupied areas immediately. Mr. President, MONUSCO is operated under extremely difficult circumstances. It faces a hostile opposition that uses GPS interference and increasingly complex weaponry. This not only severely restricts the mission's operations, but also delays humanitarian aid delivery and complicates access to the most vulnerable civilian populations. Let me be very clear. Denmark deplores, in the strongest terms, any attacks against blue helmets, UN staff, and their humanitarian partners. Such attacks are unacceptable and a violation of international law and may constitute war crimes. Mr. President, Eastern DRC has long contended with a multitude of crises. The humanitarian situation is catastrophic. With M23's advance from its surrounding areas, civilians sought protection in overburdened and overcrowded IDP camps in Goma. Widespread sexual and gender-based violence, child recruitments, hate speech and xenophobia, summary killings and other persistent violations of international humanitarian law, as well as violations and abuse of human rights, have been reported and extensively documented. We express our deep concern for the protection of civilians. We call on all parties to immediately comply with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. All responsible parties must be held to account, and the protection of civilians, including human rights defenders, journalists, and civil society, must be ensured. There is an urgent need to guarantee the security of all medical workers and humanitarian personnel, including in IDP camps. Humanitarian access and corridors must be ensured. That goes both for those fleeing and for those staying. Mr. President, the DRC has faced instability and conflict for more than 3 decades. We are now at the brink of a more widespread conflict with unspeakable devastation, not just for the Congolese people, but for the whole region. We urge all parties to act and engage in good faith and to immediately recommit to the existing, robust processes in place to resolve the conflict. We echo the statements made by the Secretary General and urge the DRC and Rwanda to remain fully engaged in the Luanda process. Momentum must be maintained on the neutralization of the FDLR and withdrawal of Rwandan forces, as well as the swift application of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism. We urge Rwanda to send its representative to the mechanism immediately. Denmark expresses its full support to both the Luanda process and the Nairobi process. We strongly urge Rwanda to immediately cease its support to the M23 and withdraw its forces, and for the DRC to immediately cease its support to the FDLR, both of which have been consistently documented by the group of experts on the DRC. Illegal exploitation of national resources in the eastern DRC is a key driver to instability in the Great Lakes region. This must end. We encourage Rwanda and DRC to investigate and prosecute all actors and networks involved. Mr. President, to conclude, as we speak, the Congolese people are suffering that long predates this meeting, this current offensive, and which has deep historical ties. They are looking to this Council to act. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank SRSG Keita, USG Lacroix, ASG Masuya for their briefings. In recent days, tensions have escalated dramatically in eastern DRC, with M23 launching offensives in North Kivu, capturing key towns such as Masisi, Minowa, and Sake, resulting in heavy civilian casualties and displacements. It is shocking that M23 firing at MONUSCO positions, resulting in the death of 3 UN peacekeepers and the injury of many others, as well as asserting the relevant actions of M23 constitute a serious violation of the ceasefire agreement and jeopardize regional peace and stability. China calls on M23 to abide by the ceasefire agreement, stop resorting to force, withdraw from the territories it has taken, and return to the track of political settlement. All external forces should refrain from providing military support to the M23 and other armed groups to prevent further deterioration of the situation. Second, the protection of civilians should be the top priority. International humanitarian law is the bottom line that must be respected, no matter what the demands and objectives of the M23 armed attacks are. It should not come at the cost of civilian lives, and it should not attack civilians and civilian facilities. At present, a large number of civilians have fled their homes seeking refuge, and a severe shortage of humanitarian supplies. The international community should provide timely humanitarian assistance. M23 should ensure that the channels of humanitarian assistance are open and unimpeded. Third, MONUSCO should be supported in performing its duties in accordance with its mandate. MONUSCO is at the forefront of the conflict and is carrying out its peacekeeping mandate in line with the Council resolutions. M23 should not threaten the safety and security of peacekeepers. Attacks on peacekeepers may constitute war crimes. China supports MONUSCO in strengthening its defensive measures in Sake and Goma and opposes acts such as jamming GPS signals that impede MONUSCO's mandate delivery. We also call on all parties to refrain from spreading misinformation and disinformation against MONUSCO and peacekeepers. Fourth, we must firmly support regional mediation efforts. Under the current circumstances, it is even more urgent to scale up mediation efforts. Although the tripartite summit has been postponed, the Rwanda process remains an effective platform for resolving the issues of Eastern DRC. China expects the DRC and Rwanda to stay committed to the track of political dialogue and strengthen communication and find a lasting peace program. China supports Angola and the other parties concerned in continuing to intensify their diplomatic efforts to ease the situation. It is our hope that SRSG on DRC, Ms. Kaita, and the Special Envoy of the SG for the Great Lakes region, Ms. Xia Huang, will strengthen coordination and provide greater support for the Rwanda and Nairobi processes. President, China reiterates its firm support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC and support for the efforts of the DRC government in safeguarding national security. We support the Council speak with one voice as soon as possible and create enabling conditions to
peacekeepers who have lost their lives in the noble cause of preserving peace and security. Third, we urge that adequate and urgent response be made to the humanitarian crisis that is being faced in Eastern DRC. Assistance must reach all those affected by the M23 offensive, and access must be ensured by all parties, including the M23, to the civilian and others in need of such assistance. Fourth, we admire the bravery of our peacekeepers. At the same time, we urge MONUSCO and the United Nations to take immediate measures to ensure the safety and security of not only civilians, but also the United Nations and other peacekeeping units itself. Pakistan feels that the withdrawal from South Kivu, which saw the withdrawal of Pakistani blue helmets from there, was hasty and influenced by political considerations. I must recall that our troops had succeeded in maintaining peace and order in South Kivu. We need to strengthen MONUSCO and equip it with the capabilities to respond to the challenges which it is facing in Eastern DRC. Without adequate reinforcements, equipment, and political support, especially from within DRC, the UN and other peacekeepers cannot be expected to implement their challenging mandate assigned to them by the Council. Six, we call on the DRC and Rwanda to resume the dialogue under the Luanda process, ably led by His Excellency President Lourenço of Angola. This process has made encouraging progress. We regret that the 15 December summit did not take place. It should be urgently reconvened. The understandings reached under the Luanda process, the neutralization of the FDLR, and the withdrawal of Rwandan forces from DRC should be maintained and implemented even as the challenge posed by the M23 is confronted and ended. We also hope that reconciliation within DRC will be achieved through the Nairobi process under the able leadership of former President Kenyatta of Kenya. We extend our full support to the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region in promoting dialogue to resolve the conflict in Eastern DRC. Finally, Mr. President, we urge that the Security Council address the root cause of the conflict in Eastern DRC, that is, the illegal exploitation of its natural resources. This requires greater oversight and traceability mechanisms, working in coordination with the DRC government and regional and international partners, and encouraged and supported by the Security Council. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we are grateful to Jean-Pierre Lacroix and Bintu Keïta and Joyce Msuya for their briefings. We welcome the participation in this meeting of the Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Teresa Wagner, and the representatives of Rwanda, Angola, South Africa, and Uruguay. Mr. President, we're extremely dismayed by the current escalation by the M23, and we condemn it. Because of its actions, the civilian population is the one that is suffering first and foremost. We express our condolences to the families of all the citizens of the DRC who have died. We're forced to witness another wave of IDPs. Their number, according to the latest UN figures, has exceeded 400,000. We're already internally displaced persons, and we're living in refugee camps in the harshest conditions. And we're particularly concerned about the use in the area of direct conflict of advanced weapon systems, the use of heavy artillery close to civilian infrastructure. And we're also troubled by the continued use of electronic warfare means, which creates a threat, inter alia, for civilian aviation. Unfortunately, the UN mission to stabilize the DRC has also taken casualties. We express our condolences to the families of the peacekeepers that have died from South Africa and Uruguay, as well as the governments of these countries. We hope for the speediest recovery of the wounded from other contingents. Russia has unconditionally condemns attacks against blue helmets. As a result of one of such attacks in March of 2022, one of our nationals, a senior member of the Russian military observers group, Alexei Mizuro, died. We express our support and gratitude to the UN mission to stabilize the DRC and its leadership and peacekeepers. We also express our deepest condolences to the families of the fighters of the Southern Africa Development Community in Malawi who were killed. Russia expresses solidarity with the governments of these countries and the contingents of this SADC. We hope for their quickest recovery. The current escalation after the breakdown of the Rwanda summit at the end of last year is clear evidence of the price that has to be paid when political instruments do not function. We call for an immediate cessation of military activities and return of Rwanda and the DRC to the negotiating table with Angolan mediation, as well as the confirmation by the parties of their commitment to the mutual obligations in the framework of the Luanda process. At the same time, we'd like to underscore that real progress on the diplomatic track will only be possible after the end of relations of states with illegal armed groups. This applies first and foremost to M23 and the Force Démocratique for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR. Whether the parameters of this process will be determined in the framework of relaunching of the Nairobi process or the result of other initiatives, that should be decided by Rwanda and the DRC. However, it is clear that this issue requires a comprehensive approach and certain flexibility by both sides. Without tackling it, it will not be possible to find a sustainable and viable formula for political resolution of the conflict, and this must be done immediately to avoid the worst. Mr. President, we should not forget that the central element of this crisis is the illegal exploitation of the Congolese natural resources. It's no secret for anyone that currently in the region rich in coltan of Rubaya, which is under the control of M23. Everyone also knows that other groups and external players are involved in this criminal business. We all know who they are. And they are enriching themselves by smuggling blood natural resources from the eastern part of the DRC. We are convinced that the struggle to gain access towards strategically important Congolese minerals is one of the reasons for the continuation of the crisis we're witnessing. Once again, we call on countries with political and economic influence in the region to use it and to work with the main protagonists. This could contribute to a rapid end of the escalation, which was demonstrated very well by the situation that we witnessed in 2012 and 2013. At the same time, together with other members of the Security Council, we will continue working on coordinating the appropriate reaction to these events, which are taking place in the east of the DRC. We hope that we will be able to find the right language that will contribute to ending suffering of the civilian population and a return to negotiations. In conclusion, I'd like to say that we should not forget about the fact that the instability in the Great Lakes region is to a large extent a legacy of the colonial period. It was precisely then that the metropoles of the time laid the ticking time bomb that the region continues to suffer from. We see how the Congolese are tired of violence and how much they just want to live and work on their own land. Russia, as a permanent member of the Security Council, will do everything possible to bring this long-for moment closer. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Mr. President, my delegation would like to thank the presidency of this council for making the relevant arrangements to convene this emergency meeting to address the alarming situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We'd also like to welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic. We recognize and we value the briefing by the Special Representative of the Secretary General to the DRC and the head of MONUSCO, Ms. Bintou Keita, whose leadership is crucial at this critical juncture. We also, in light of the news that has been conveyed today, which is unacceptable to the Republic of Panama, we also extend our thanks to USG Jean-Pierre Lacroix and ASG Joyce Masuya. We thank them for their valuable contributions in this complex scenario, which has had a direct effect on tens and hundreds of thousands of displaced persons. Panama expresses its deep concern at the escalating conflict in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, marked by the recent advances of the March 20 movement rebel group in North Kivu has further worsened the already precarious humanitarian and security situation. The recent 20th of January offensive has worsened the mass displacement of civilians towards Goma and has caused irreparable, including the tragic death of the military governor of North Kivu, Major General Peter Sirimwani. The M23's advances, as well as the consolidation of local de facto administrations, not only pose a serious threat to the stability of the region, but also directly threaten international efforts in mediation and peacemaking, such as those under the Luanda and Nairobi processes. We condemn in the strongest terms the actions of the M23 and of all those which directly or indirectly are fueling this crisis. It's urgent for all actors to act responsibly and immediately end any form of support for the armed groups. Failing this, the suffering of the Congolese people will worsen yet further. President, these events are also jeopardizing the lives of UN personnel and stymieing their ability to effectively implement their mandate. Against this backdrop, it is essential for this Council to enhance its support for MONUSCO, guaranteeing the necessary resources and support to enable it to respond to the current challenges and to protect the most vulnerable populations. We reject and we roundly condemn the attacks perpetrated on United Nations staff. Furthermore, we deeply regret the tragic loss of lives of blue helmets in the recent clashes during operations in the North Kivu province in the DRC. We express our most heartfelt solidarity and condolences to the governments and peoples of South Africa, Malawi, and Uruguay for irreparable human losses. We also align ourselves and support the families at this difficult time. We honor the bravery and the sacrifice of those who, with exemplary commitment, dedicated their efforts to the noble mission of preserving international peace and security. We recognize and we thank those countries that have contributed troops to the United Nations Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, thus contributing to the mandate of protecting civilians and promoting stability in the country. Distinguished colleagues, Mr. President, we strongly appeal to all involved parties to fully respect the ceasefire, to bring an immediate end to hostilities, and to honor the commitment in Nairobi processes. Furthermore, we reiterate the urgent need to resume negotiations under the Nairobi process, recognizing that inclusive dialogue involving all relevant stakeholders is essential to reach a lasting political solution. President, to conclude, Panama reaffirms its firm and unwavering commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We believe that a comprehensive and coordinated approach combining the leadership of regional mechanisms with the resolute support of this Council is essential to bring an end to the violence and to ease the suffering of the Congolese people. President, time is running out. We cannot allow the promises of peace to fade into inaction. Today, more than ever, it is imperative for the international community to step up its efforts to strengthen MONUSCO's operational capacity. History will not judge us on our intentions, but rather our actions. Only with steadfast commitment and concrete action will we be able to pave the way towards sustainable peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this urgent meeting. I thank SRSG Keita, the USG Lacroix, ASG Msuya for their timely briefings. I also welcome Foreign Minister Wagner of the DRC, as well as the representatives of Rwanda, Angola, Uruguay, South Africa, and Burundi to this meeting. At the outset, the Republic of Korea expresses its deepest condolences and sympathies to the bereaved families and nations of all peacekeepers who have sacrificed their lives in fulfilling their mandate. We also wish a speedy and full recovery to all those injured. I'd like to underscore 4 points today concerning the devastating developments on the ground. First, we condemn in the strongest possible terms the ongoing offensive by the M23 in North Kivu and demand the M23 to immediately cease its unjustifiable attacks. The M23's attempts to capture Goma, a city of around 2 million, must stop all forms of support to the M23, and unauthorized foreign military forces must withdraw from the DRC without delay. Otherwise, consequences will only lead to further violence and instability, not only in eastern DRC, but also in the larger Great Lakes region. Furthermore, the involvement of Burundian and other forces, coupled with the opening of new battlefronts in South Kivu, where MONUSCO has already withdrawn, significantly heightens the risk of this rapidly expanding crisis escalating into a full-scale regional conflict. Third, the safety and security of peacekeepers must be upheld as a requisite priority in carrying out their mandates. In this light, we strongly condemn the attacks against the positions and bases of MONUSCO and the Sami DRC, which have already resulted in numerous casualties. The use of GPS jamming and spoofing, along with the deployment of surface-to-air missiles, is particularly alarming. Credible reports implicating Rwanda in these hostile acts are profoundly troubling. These actions gravely undermine the safety and security of UN peacekeepers and significantly hinder MONUSCO's ability to fulfill its key mandate of protecting civilians. We take this opportunity to reiterate that attacks against peacekeepers may constitute war crimes, and the involvement in such acts warrant sanctions designations in accordance with Security Council resolutions. Fourth, we call on the DRC and Rwanda to return to dialogue and fully implement their commitments under the Rwanda process. The postponement of the tripartite summit planned for December was disappointing, but it must not undermine the progress achieved thus far. We recognize the differing interests of the DRC and Rwanda, but further escalation of tensions is simply unacceptable. Many lives are at stake. We reaffirm our unwavering support for President Lourenço of Angola and his important mediation efforts. All commitments under the Rwanda process must be upheld, including the neutralization of the FDLR and the disengagement of forces. The operationalization of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism is essential to ensure strict compliance with the ceasefire. In conclusion, Mr. President, as we stand on the precipice of even greater violence and instability in Eastern DRC, my delegation reiterates our urgent appeal for de-escalation and for all parties to step back from the brink. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Therese Kayikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, allow me, on behalf of the government and people, attack against international peace and security. The Democratic Republic of the Congo legitimately expects from this Council to act firmly and promptly to safeguard international peace and security and to uphold international law. This is a power that is exclusively granted to the Council by the UN Charter. Mr. President, at this very moment, as I'm speaking before you, an attack of unprecedented intensity is taking place in plain sight of the world. Additional Rwandan troops have crossed the boundary markers 12 and 13 of the border crossing between Goma and Gisenyi, penetrating into our territory in broad daylight, in open and deliberate violation of our national sovereignty. It's a frontal aggression, a declaration of war, which no longer hides itself behind diplomatic maneuvers. In Goma, the armed forces of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, supported by the troops of the United Nations and the SADC, are defending the city and its population on several fronts with courage and determination that only a just and noble cause to defend one's legitimate right to exist can inspire. But this combat is not limited to the field of battle. Over 3 million civilians as well as humanitarian workers have been taken hostage by the aggressors, used as human shields in a cynical strategy of terror and chaos. The signs are unmistakable. Rwanda is preparing to orchestrate a carnage in broad daylight with a brutality that recalls the darkest pages of our history. It is imperative that these combats cease immediately. Each hour that passes brings our region closer to a tragedy of an unimaginable scale. We refuse to see a repetition of a nightmare of 1996, this dark page in African history that we had thought had turned. Today, the victims are not only Congolese. This attack is aimed at Africa as a whole. I would even say against humanity as a whole. Rwandan bullets indistinctly hit South Africans, Tanzanians, Malawis, Burundian citizens, all African brothers and sisters that have come for peace. And what about you, members of the Council? This aggression is not only aimed against the Democratic Republic of the Congo, it is aimed at you, your mission, against your soldiers of peace that you have mandated to protect and not to be targeted. Let me be absolutely clear. Each minute that passes without decisive action by this Council is a victory for the aggressor. Each hesitation undermines the credibility of the United Nations and condemns innocence to an unspeakable fate. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the world is watching you. It's time to act. Since the 6th of January of 2025, the Defense Forces of Rwanda, RDF, and their auxiliaries from the M23 have stepped up their attacks in flagrant violation of the ceasefire of the 4th of August 2024, occupying strategic towns such as Katale, Lushebere, and Masisi Center before continuing on to Bweremana, Minova, and Kalunga. These attacks aggravate an already disastrous humanitarian situation, provoking the displacement of millions of Congolese, aiming to drive them out from their homes and establishing a parallel administration and modify the configuration of the region. In Goma, the RDF have deliberately warned against falling into the trap of the fallacious pretext put forward by the government of Rwanda, which has invoked the protection of one of our numerous minorities as justification for its interference. The reality is very different. Today, in the Congolese IDP camps, the victims are of all ethnic groups, including the Congolese Tutsis that are suffering the same tragic fate that their fellow citizens in the face of the violence of the Rwandan Armed Forces M23. So as we face this humanitarian disaster, it's clear that this crisis is directly linked to the economic plunder of the east of our country. The last report of the group of experts reveals the scale of the economic plunder by Rwanda in the east of the DRC. Each month, over 150 tons of coltan are illegally extracted and transported to Rwanda, where they're fraudulously labeled for export. This illicit commerce compromises the sovereignty of our country and finances military activities of the DFR and M23. In Rubaya, the largest site of mining of coltan in the region, the RDF and the M23 have established a parallel administration, exploiting our resources and imposing their control on local populations with complete impunity. These activities must be punished. However, this illegal exploitation is only one aspect of the aggression carried out by Rwanda. Since the start of their campaign of terror in 2022, the RDF and the M23 have systematically targeted peacekeeping forces. The 24th of January of this year, Major General Peter Kirimwami Nkuba, military governor of North Kivu, was assassinated by Rwandan forces as he commanded on the front lines. On the 25th of January of this year, 9 South African soldiers, 3 soldiers of Malawi, and a Uruguayan soldier were killed in clashes with Rwanda and M23. A tank of the United Nations was set on fire, crossing a new threshold in hostility towards multilateral institutions. Furthermore, a company of Tanzanian blue helmets in Kanyabayonga remains surrounded and cut from all supplies by the RDF and the M23. The last report of the group of experts also revealed and their auxiliaries arsenal, ground-to-air missiles, GPS-guided mortars, and anti-tank missiles. These flagrant violations of the arms embargo regime and international humanitarian law are a grave threat to the Great Lakes region. These 3 dimensions, humanitarian, economic, and security, reveal an reality. We're seeing a systematic and coordinated aggression against the Democratic Republic of the Congo by Rwanda. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, the Luanda process, designed to offer a framework for a peaceful resolution, has been sabotaged by the intransigence of Rwanda. Each commitment undertaken in Luanda has been trampled on, starting with the ceasefire of the 4th of August. Also, since the establishment of the reinforced ad hoc verification mechanism in Goma on the 5th of November of 2023, Rwanda has never sent its 3 military experts to supervise the implementation of the ceasefire. You might recall that during our last meeting On the 8th of December in this room, the permanent representative of Rwanda claimed that the experts were on their way to Goma. Today, 82 days to this flagrant contempt demonstrated by Rwanda for the Luanda process. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is fully committed and reiterates its trust in His Excellency João Lorenzo. This process, endorsed by the African Union, is the only legitimate framework for a political solution to the conflict between the DRC and Rwanda. This framework, exclusively between states, cannot include non-state actors or elevate them to the same status as sovereign states. The Democratic Republic of the Congo will reject any attempt in the Luanda process, directing it towards its legitimate framework, that is the Nairobi process under the facilitation of His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta. The DRC reiterates its full confidence in him and rejects any attempt to dilute his efforts at mediation. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, in spite of the repeated warnings of the government of the DRC for the past 3 years, this Council has remained inactive. This Council cannot content itself with declarations of concern or simply to remain seized of the matter. Its mandate, its duty is to protect international peace and security, to defend human life without distinction for origin, race, religion, or gender. This Council is a guarantor of the hope and faith in better days, in days of peace, development, and prosperity. This is why we call this Council to act decisively and immediately in conformity with the provided in the latest report of the group of experts. Here are the concrete actions that we demand of the Council. The Security Council must order immediately the end of hostilities by Rwanda and demand an immediate withdrawal of Rwandan troops present on Congolese territory. This Security Council must impose targeted sanctions, including asset freeze and travel ban, not only against identified members of the chain of command of the RDF, but also against the political decision makers responsible for this aggression. The Security Council must impose a complete embargo on the export of all labeled minerals, or all minerals labeled as Rwandan, and in particular coltan and gold, in order to put an end to the illegal exploitation of natural resources of the DRC and financing of armed conflict. The Council must revoke immediately the status of Rwanda as a troop-contributing country to peacekeeping operations. The coordinated actions of the RDF and the M23 are grave violation of international law and compromise the integrity of peacekeeping operations. Lastly, must establish a regime of systematic violation for all sale or transfer of weapons to Rwanda by member states or private entities. This will guarantee that these weapons are not used to equip armed groups under embargo, such as the M23. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, major turning point. Indecision and inaction can no longer be tolerated in the face of a crisis that threatens to plunge our country and the region into absolute chaos. Each day of delay spurs the aggressor and weakens the principles that found this organization. We call this Council to fully use the full range of measures envisioned under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter to preserve peace and protect the sovereignty of the DRC. The Congolese people are moved by a profound aspiration, the aspiration of living in security, to building a prosperous future and actively contribute together with other nations of the world to an international order based on the respect for law and principles of justice. This aspiration will not be stifled. We exhort you to write a new page of courage and commitment, a page where the values of multilateralism and solidarity and calculation. History will remember your decisions today, as it will remember our tireless fight for peace, dignity, and sovereignty. And to those who justify what cannot be justified, we will say this: there is no place in these chambers dedicated to global peace for rhetoric that's sacrificing innocent lives. The respect for the evidence